if I can do this. Great. Okay. So I think we're now good to go. Thanks again for your patience. So before we really get started, I want to do a quick poll just to see what age you guys are at and where you are in your undergraduate studies right now. So perfect. I see things coming in, so I hope that poll actually worked. Awesome. So no freshmen so far, that's okay. But it looks like half of you guys are seniors who have kind of pulled in so far, and then you're split with sophomores and juniors. So I think this is, this is a great time to be considering, is grad school the right next step for you? And for the sophomores and juniors, you can definitely look forward in terms of what can you do to kind of prepare yourself for graduate school. Cool, thanks for doing that poll. I'll share the results. Cool. Okay, so before we really launch off, let's see, I want to do a quick introductions. And so this presentation, it's gonna be a presentation and a panel discussion. And I wanna first start by letting our panelists introduce themselves. So panelists, if you wanna, introduce yourself and include maybe like why you chose to go to graduate school, and why you thought that was, your best next step, that would be great. And so we'll start with Brandon. So Brandon, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well this semester. So I got my bachelor's from the University of South Carolina. I'm currently a third-year PhD student in Dr. Gounder's group. I think I chose to continue research because I discovered I enjoyed doing research from the research opportunities I was provided through undergrad. Also, I just like independent thinking and like solving problems myself, like not having too much guiding. I just got to try things out. And it was really cool to me. One thing I found through doing research in many different places over my years in undergrad as well as in grad school was that I could make a change in the scientific community. And if I knew I wanted to continue and make a change to science, even if it wasn't like a huge change, like I was contributing some way to science, and like researching this science also helped like put this technology into the future. I thought that was really cool. And even if it didn't have a big chance, but it had some sort of chance, I thought that was fascinating and blew my mind. So I really enjoyed it. So
cool. So we'll flip over to Laryssa. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Can you guys hear me? I always forget if I double mute myself. Okay, I'm not double muted. Hello, everybody. My name is Laryssa. I just graduated from my PhD last year in 2019, August 2019. So I'm 1 year out of grad school right now. I currently work for Dow Chemical Company. I am a senior research specialist. I did my PhD at Purdue, but my undergrad was in Brazil, where I am from. And why did I want to do grad school? Why did I want to have a PhD? Just like Brandon said before, basically I was always interested in research. I always wanted to somehow be able to contribute to the bigger scientific community. Not too much to the science, to the theory part, but more on the application. I was always very interested in how they made discoveries, how they start to do new applications for materials, what goes behind that. I always wanted to be able to do something like that, research and see the fruits of my work in front of me, like coming to life in real life. So yeah, that's why I wanted to do my PhD. And I really enjoyed the whole experience. I thought, yeah, PhD is hard, but it was a fun experience. And today I work at Dow Chemical Company. I was in Jeff Miller's group. I was in a catalysis research group at Purdue, but now I work with silicones. So when we talk about that, I can talk a little bit about how the transfer is between coming out of catalysis and going into something completely different from the PhD. Yes, that's possible. That happens a lot, actually. And it's a fun experience. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And so a little bit about my background. So I work currently in the Office of Graduate Education here at Purdue in the College of Engineering. And I actually finished up my PhD in the Boston area a couple years ago. And my PhD is in cell molecular biology. And so really, I wanted to get my PhD because I absolutely loved seeing people learn. So as an undergrad, I was a teaching assistant for a lab course. I loved kind of working with my fellow undergrads, showing them how to use the different lab skills. And then I also was a tutor, so I loved kind of teaching in that aspect. And then when I started research, I actually only started research my senior year of my when I was an undergrad. And once I started doing research, I just fell in love with research. And so all of those things kind of came together and informed my decision to go to graduate school. So, you know, graduate school might not be on your radar, it might be on your radar, and you'll have a lot of different reasons for why you want to go. I would say my best piece of advice is follow your gut in those regards. And so we'll talk over a little bit of that today. And so before we dive into questions with the panelists, I'm going to take a few minutes to go through, you know, what is graduate school really like? And, you know, as we're going through, if you have any questions, I'm going to pull up the chat function, maybe I am. Yeah, I'm definitely going to pull up the chat function. So I have that. So feel free to chat in questions as you have them. And I'll try and stop and look at that every now and then. But we are a smaller group, so if you want to just hold your questions, you can unmute yourself during kind of some Q&A space throughout the presentation. So what is graduate school really like? In graduate school, you'll be juggling a lot of different things. So not only will you be taking classes, but you might actually also be teaching classes. If you're going for a research-based degree, then, you know, not only will you be doing research in a lab, but you'll be presenting your research, you'll be writing up your research in papers, and at the very end of your graduate degree, you'll be writing up your thesis. And so all of these kind of come together to make up the graduate school experience. And the breakdown of this will look a little different for each grad student, but there are some common things that and common expectations that each and every graduate student will have and go through in graduate school. So what is graduate school? Graduate school is an environment of people who love to learn. So you'll be taking in-depth classes, specifically kind of in that field of study, in that niche that you love. It is a new way of thinking. It's very different from your undergraduate studies. And if you're doing research in your graduate degree, then you'll be exploring a part of the field that no one has really studied before, right? Like, this is really exciting. So in undergrad, you're kind of reading the textbooks, but in graduate school, you're informing all the research and the knowledge that goes into those textbooks, right? It's super cool, and you're making an impact through what you're doing. And so grad school really is an endeavor that requires commitment, passion, and drive. And so I would say you really need to know why you want to go and get your graduate degree, because grad school really is not an excuse to put off the real world. I would caution against like riding that momentum from undergrad into your graduate school. You should really start to figure out like what your motivation is and why, you know, why graduate school might be important to you and why it might be important for your career moving forward. So I want to flip this over to our lovely panelists and ask, you know, what, coming from a chemical engineering background, why did you think that a graduate degree was really important for your career? And so either one of you guys can just unmute yourself and then take it away.
So I guess I can go first. So for me, even though I came from a chemical engineering background, I think there are two sides of why the graduate degree was so important for me. One is because that was a different experience for me, not only because it's grad school, but also because it's an international experience. Before coming to grad school, I was born and raised in Brazil. I didn't go anywhere outside of Brazil. Coming to the US was the first time ever that I was outside of Brazil, basically. So that was a big international experience for me. So even if I didn't stay in the US, going back to Brazil, I would have that good experience of having lived in another country and acquiring more insights from a different culture. And second, in the grad school itself, is because I really want to do research, at least back in Brazil, which is probably the same in here, at least from my experience that I had with undergrad students back at Purdue. When you leave undergrad, normally you go to jobs like a production engineer, or you are a run planting engineer, or you go somewhere different, more administrative roles or more managerial roles. And I want to do something more research focused. And grad school gives you the opportunity to really learn how to do research. Yes, you can do that coming out of undergrad, but not a lot of companies hire undergrads into research R&D. Dow is one of them. Dow actually hires people who come out of undergrad into R&D, but normally you are in a lower position in R&D than someone that comes in a PhD. That is not going to set you back a lot in the career. You can still grow a lot, even if you're coming from an undergrad background. But grad school gives you more of a safer environment to learn. You can learn from scratch how to do research. And those are some of the things that is really valuable now. Because when you come to the company, such as Dow right now, you need to learn all of the administrative parts of the company. You need to learn a lot of the company requirements, and you also need to do research. When you go to grad school, for example, a PhD, you just have to do the research. Yes, there are like some other minor roles that you have to do, but it's not a lot of stakes that you have in grad school. You can really focus on research and really learn how to do everything from scratch. So I'd say that was really what I thought that was important to me, was learning how to do research.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would say for me, talking to like alumni at USC and like different friends that got jobs later on, they mainly got like production like workers, like they were like product like inspections and stuff like that, more managerial positions, where they actually didn't get to apply too much of the fundamentals they learned in undergrad. And that didn't sound fun to me. I wanted to actually apply what I learned in undergrad and use it in many different ways to solve interesting problems that people rarely think about. Or if they do think about it, I want to find a new way to make a breakthrough in the field. I thought that was the main appeal to me, is I actually want to apply what I learned. And like Laryssa said, like in terms of career, you're going to be stuck in this managerial position or like this production engineer where you don't have much wiggle room to like move up as much as I would say, or like freedom as someone with a PhD. So like I like the idea of like if I like right now I'm doing research in catalysis. If I want to apply catalysis to like, let's say the bioengineering field, I can do so. Like I'm not tied to one field. I can just branch out and do whatever my intellectual heart desires. So I just find that very things, and like it seems like with a PhD, your possibilities are endless compared to an undergrad where you're more restricted. That's what I liked. It's basically you could do anything with a PhD. Research. So that was what appealed to me.
Nice. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to transition a little bit about maybe some motivation to go to graduate school. And I think our panelists have touched on this already, but I'm just going to kind of reiterate it. So why go to graduate school? So if you're passionate about learning or research, then graduate school is a great option for you. You'll become an expert and generate kind of that new knowledge, like our panelists were saying. You'll also grow your professional network, right? You'll meet a lot of different people, not only kind of in your chemical engineering discipline, but you might meet graduate students in other disciplines, and they might be like key to getting you a job. You'll also enhance your career options, kind of what Brandon was saying. You are versatile. You can be flexible with what you're looking at. And so in addition to kind of careers and industry, A graduate degree can really set you up for careers as a leader in a number of different professions, such as academia, being a professor, national labs. A PhD can really be looked at as a license to think, right, and think critically. And so employers love this, right? They just love this. They eat it up. And so there are other really great career options in other fields such as patent law, science policy, consulting, entrepreneurship, and even more. So, if you're wondering whether graduate school is for you, then you really want to ask yourself, what are my short and long-term goals? Will an advanced degree help me obtain these goals? And am I choosing graduate school because I feel like there are no other options at this time? So again, I caution against riding that momentum into graduate school. And are you willing to invest the time, effort, expense required for graduate study? And one thing I would suggest to you is, to determine what type of job you might want, you can ask yourself, what is the educational background of people in positions doing things that you want to do? And if you're really not sure how to do this, you can get really creative on LinkedIn and find people in those positions and look at their educational background. You can totally sleuth like that. But I would actually recommend reaching out to them directly, trying to find some Purdue connection because you have a vast alumni network being Purdue undergrads. Connect directly with those people because sometimes there are additional educational requirements that will change over the years. Maybe someone has a master's degree in X job that they got 20 years ago, but now that job requires a PhD or a bajillion years of experience, right? So talk with people in those positions and figure out what is that, what does that position you want? What does it require? And is a graduate school a factor in that? So, and Laryssa, this might be a little bit of a throwback, but what is a typical day like as a graduate student? And how is this really different from undergrad?
That's a good one. It is totally different from an undergrad because when you are undergrad, you do have to attend classes all the time, basically. Even when you are in the lab, you still have classes to attend. For grad school, you only have to attend classes for the first 3 semesters. Oh my God, I don't remember anymore. I just graduated last year. Come on. 3 or 4 semesters, I would say. And it's not full-time either because your whole focus should always be your research. Your classes are more secondary. I'm not saying don't invest in your classes. Yes, you still need to study for your classes, but you do need to focus on your research primarily. So it's a lot of, in the first semesters, it's a lot of balancing classes and research. In the final semesters, starting on the 5th to the end of your PhD, it's just a lot being in the lab or in your office, trying to write your thesis, trying to write papers, analyzing data. You can make your day how you want, at least everybody that I know at Purdue, you make your own schedule. You decide if you want to work from 9 or from 7 a.m. to whenever you want. The main thing is that you do need to finish your experiments. You do have experiments to do, and you do need to write papers. You do need to do all of this stuff to help you graduate, basically, and get your PhD. So sometimes you can go later in the day if you want. You make your own schedule, basically. But almost everybody that I know, yes, we do have to work on the weekends. Sometimes we do need to go to the lab on the weekends. Some people do go to the lab every single weekend of the year. Sometimes it depends on the advisor. Sometimes it depends on you and what you are willing to do or not for your research. Because sometimes weekends are the best time that you can have the lab to yourself. Even so, now I think we still have the buddy system. You should not be in the lab by yourself, or at least let someone know that you are in the lab. But yeah, I would say that's the main difference between being an undergrad and a grad student. You now have your mission of doing your research, learn everything that you can about your research, be the expert on your research. So that should be your main focus.
I would say for a typical day as a grad student, compared to undergrad, it shifts from homework and classes to research heavy, where the classes are now the back burner. You still have to like do well enough to pass the class, but like it's not your top priority as an undergrad. And another like huge thing I would say is like the difference between being a grad student and undergrad is like undergrad with a class, once you turn in that homework, you're done. In grad school, you run experiments, you're not done 9 times out of 10. Like you have a lot more things to do, and it's a continuous process. For undergrad, I would make this analogy where I would say undergrad is more of a sprint, where you're just trying to get done and get your degree, whereas grad school is more of a marathon where you're continually having to work throughout the year instead of in undergrad where you have fall and then you get a break, spring you get a break, and then summer, depending if you have an internship or whatnot, is still more of a break. Whereas in grad school, you're just going from January to December, working with maybe let's say like a 2-week vacation on holidays throughout the year. So it's more of a marathon. You just have to prep yourself for that. And like typical day things I do during the day, like I always have to read papers, work up data, and run experiments, and write or prepare presentations for group meetings. So like those are just continually on a rolling basis where you're always doing something. Like there's not a lack of work to do. There's always something to do, and there isn't something to do, you're doing something wrong. So, or it's a vacation. That's to be fair. Grad students do get vacations.
Yeah, and I would ping on that and say that, you know, it is a different way of learning, right? And it's you're learning, but you're learning more in that work-based setting. I think both of our speakers have really touched upon that. So you're not necessarily like learning out of a textbook, but you're learning by doing. And one thing that I think a lot of people forget about is that, or a lot of people don't really understand until they're in it, that like you'll fail a lot of times, like doing experiments, and it's okay, right? Because you're going to fail gracefully, you're going to learn from it, and then you're going to take it up and move it, right? But that's something that's really important to remember, and just factoring that in, that, you know, that it is, I love that analogy. I've never heard of like that. Like it's a marathon. It is, because you have to keep that factored in, especially with your mental health, right? Like, because it's really easy in undergrad to binge for that exam and have it be done. But that is really not graduate school. You have to really like be a sponge and take in that knowledge and be excited about it. So yeah, and so I did see a question in the chat, which I'm about to answer. So it was, you know, how does a PhD compare to a master's degree? And so I'm about to touch on that right now. So thank you. So, and this might be familiar to some of you guys, but I want to just make sure we're all on the same page and walk through these common graduate degrees. So for master's degrees, there can be a couple different flavors. If you enjoy doing research, then there is this thesis-based master's degree. And if you're interested in only taking courses, then there's the non-thesis or non-research-based master's degrees as well. There are professional master's degrees, which tend to be terminal degrees. And I won't really go into too much detail about these terminal master's degrees, but they tend to be the highest in their given field. And however, here at Purdue, our chemical engineering program actually has a thing called a professional master's degree. And again, this is a non-thesis based degree where you are only doing coursework, but sometimes they sprinkle in some management courses. So really that it depends on what you want to do with your career, but that could also be a good non-thesis master's option as well. And then there is the Doctor of Philosophy, which is, you know, this is kind of that highest degree that you can confer at most universities. You can go directly into this from your undergraduate degree, from your undergrad, or you could go and get your master's degree first. So there's a few different ways that you can tackle getting a Doctor of Philosophy. And so really, again, the question in the chat, excuse me, how does a PhD compare to a master's degree, or really what's the difference between them? So let me just drink some tea. Thank you. So master's degree tends to be about 30 credits, whereas a PhD tends to be about 90 credits. And what this means is that a number of your credits from your master's degree can actually roll over into your PhD. So when you're getting your PhD, a lot of times you will confer a master's degree along the way. Then for master's degree, like I said, there can be thesis or non-thesis, so research or coursework only. Whereas for a PhD, you're actually going to do primarily research, like our panelists were saying, and then at the very end, you're going to write up this dissertation, and that dissertation is required. And actually, so like this is my dissertation, right? Like good fun times, right? You literally can get a book of everything that you did during your PhD. And then, so for a master's degree, it tends to be about 1 to 2 years, but for a PhD, it can take about 3 to 5 years after your master's degree. It took me 6. I came directly in from my undergrad. So we really don't like to have students in for more than 6 years if they come directly in from their undergrad. And for a master's degree, again, it depends on what you want to do with these different degrees. For a master's degree, you can go into careers requiring some specialization, some management positions, some limited research. But again, if you really want to be kind of a leader in those areas, you will likely need a PhD. So for a PhD, you can do careers in research and development. You can lead, and you can be in different academic positions as well. So for the panelists, how did you decide between getting a master's and PhD? And you might have touched upon this a little bit, but feel free to chime on in about why you decided master's versus PhD.
So like I said before, I always want to do research, so that's what drove me towards the PhD. I wanted to do more research focused. I want my career to be more research focused. I knew that I wanted to work in research and development, so that's why I decided to go towards a PhD instead of a master's. In Brazil, normally you do need to get the master's before you get the PhD. Here in the US, it's not required. You can go straight from your bachelor's into the PhD. It will take a little longer if you do the master's plus PhD after, or maybe not. It highly depends on your school, your advisor, and your research topics. But yeah, so that's why I decided to do a PhD. I wanted to do research.
Yeah, so I'm with Laryssa. Like the main reason I want to do a PhD is because I want to do research. I found it very riveting and interesting. But also, when I was an undergrad, I talked to some alumni, and I'm just generally speaking about what I'm saying. I'm not doing any specific case or one size fits all. But most of the alumni I talked to said that a master's would get an increase of pay for someone in a bachelor that had a bachelor's degree, but they would do basically the same job as a bachelor's degree, and I didn't want that. Also, the companies, they told me that companies would rather hire someone with a bachelor's degree than a master's because they will pay them less money and they're basically doing the same thing. So why not pay the cheaper one and just teach them those extra skills that someone acquired in a master's? Not saying this is always true, but that's what like my undergrad friends told me. And the last deciding factor for me, besides like hesitating and like I would say jumping in a master's and then deciding to do a PhD, is that most of the time you have to pay for a master's, whereas all PhD degrees in chemical engineering are typically paid for, or from what I've heard and seen that they're paid for, whereas masters, they typically you have to pay out of pocket for them. So.
Yeah. So Izodua, did that answer your question about how PhDs compare to master's degrees? Yeah, or you can unmute. Yeah. Okay.
My parents both have PhDs in their respective fields, and so it's always an ongoing discussion in my family as the non-PhD interested person. So I was just curious about why you chose PhD over master's, and that answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, it's really going to fall back on, what do you love to do on a day-to-day basis, and what do you want to do kind of in that future career? So I can see you all here, I think, right now. So by a raise of hands, how many of you guys are doing or have done research right now? Or yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good amount. Cool. That's like more than half of you guys. So very cool. Yeah, I would say keep it up. And if you haven't gotten a chance to do research yet, then definitely start reaching out to some faculty. I have some slides in a little bit on that. So, okay. So now I just kind of want to discuss a few different scenarios. So there is this big question, right, of to job or to go to graduate school, right? And so the different scenarios we're going to discuss really quick is the money factor. So, you know, for the money factor, one argument that could be made is that some employers may pay for you to go to grad school, right? And so I just want to talk about some pros and cons of these different scenarios. So a negative of this could be that, you know, if your employer pays for you to go to graduate school, then you're going to have to juggle kind of that full-time workload and school. And it might take you a little bit longer to complete because of that. And typically when you're doing this, they'll be all online. So typically you're limited to these non-thesis master's degrees if your employer is paying for you to go back. And it could also include sometimes kind of the service requirement where you owe the company so many years of work. So another factor that you should take into account is that funding is available now for graduate school. Like Brandon said, you know, pretty remarkably, all of our PhD students are funded. And so, you know, there are fellowships, both internal and external at Purdue, to kind of pay for you and pay for your graduate school and graduate funding. There's also assistantships. I'll touch upon more of these a little bit later. So those include research, teaching, administrative assistantships. And another pro for this is that, you know, many funding opportunities, like Brandon said, you know, they include tuition, so they'll cover tuition, and they'll also provide you with a paycheck. And yes, there is funding for international students. So if you are admitted to a PhD program, they don't look whether international or domestic. If you're in a PhD program, you are fully funded. They might get money from different sources. You might be funded on an assistantship versus some fellowships are only open to internal or only domestic students, I'm sorry. So that could be something, a consideration, but if you are admitted, then you would be covered for your PhD studies. One downside of funding is that sometimes it can be competitive, right? So a lot of external fellowships are very competitive. But if you are admitted to a PhD program, like I said, if you don't receive funding, you're doing it wrong. So you should always be fully funded as a PhD student. And I do have to say that more than 70% of Purdue's full-time graduate students, so that's both master's and PhD, are fully funded. It's not so in chemical engineering, we have a professional master's program. And again, that's non-thesis. And so that doesn't come with money because you're only taking courses, right? But if you're on an assistantship or you're doing some sort of research work, then that is a method of getting your graduate school career funded. But for PhD students, you are fully funded. So that can vary a little bit from discipline to discipline. Yes, and I will get to your question, AIChE, shortly. So I will get to it. So another, second scenario that, we should just discuss is sometimes, undergrad burns you out and sometimes you just need a break, and that is totally understandable. So there's this, scenario or factor that, time off from work can give you that mental break that you need. And this can be positive because it, can provide you with some valid work experience and really allow you to determine your focus, narrow into your field, figure out where you really want to, jump off to pursue your graduate work, or really where you want to focus. But, it's often really hard to return to school once you start working. And so, sometimes you might want to start a family, life happens, you might hit a career ceiling. I will say that the majority of the graduate students in my PhD program came back to get their PhD because they hit a career ceiling. Or because, they were working, they hit that ceiling, and then they had to come back. And one thing I will say is, since I came directly in from my undergraduate to graduate school, I was kind of more apt on the classes. Like, classes weren't difficult for me. because I was already in that mode. However, for them, since they were out kind of working, they had to get used to, you know, taking classes again, and they were really great at the research, but they had to like kind of get that brain going again for classes. So there are these pros and cons, right, for taking a break from school. And one other kind of factor that you should consider is that graduate school really isn't like undergrad, right? So some pros in this is that it allows you to really focus on research and classes that you like. You can really gain those professional networks, build out those networks, meet new people, which can open up doors for your future career. And like Brandon was saying, you know, having that graduate degree can sometimes allow you to start kind of in those higher level positions and progress more quickly. And you can really, it opens a PhD, really opens up those doors, like I said, to really whatever you want to do. You know, as a PhD in cell molecular biology, did I expect to be, you know, working at Purdue Engineering when I started? No, I didn't. But I realized what I really loved to do, and it allowed me to, my PhD allowed me to make informed decisions and have two very strong feet to stand on for saying why I want to do what I do every single day. And you get a level of respect that I think you wouldn't necessarily get just with your undergraduate degree, or maybe even only with your master's. So it really depends on what career you want to do. In terms of, you know, graduate school is not like undergrad. Again, we kind of talked about some downsides is that it does require commitment and hard work. You're not going to be able to just float through your classes or research. You have to, you know, it is a marathon. So, and, you know, it's really important to know what area of interest you want to pursue for your graduate degree. And if you're really not sure about a PhD, you could always start with a master's degree and start to carve out what space you want to be in. But again, right, you need to do what feels right for you and for your career. It's really important to be thoughtful regarding this next step of, you know, after your undergraduate studies. And you really should know that people are here to help you make those decisions, gain these additional experiences, and really help you to succeed and launch off for your next step. So, panelists, thought on taking some time off between undergrad and grad school? Did you ever think about it? Because I know you guys both came straight in.
So it's kind of funny for me because even though I came straight in, I did take some time off in between, because since I graduated in Brazil, the school year in Brazil goes from January to December. So I graduated in December 2014. But then grad school here in the US would not start until like August next year. So I did have that break of 6 months in between. It was kind of like a gray area for me because I could not work full time as a me because I was coming to the US. So it was more like doing other stuff. It was a fun time out, I would say. Like I had those 8 months.
So what did you do?
I was mainly like working by myself, like tutoring students. It was really nice, actually. I was tutoring both like the actual high school students into that were transitioning, that were trying to get into college. So I was tutoring high school students. I also had this fun student that he was actually a worker, who was a full-time worker, but he came from Korea to Brazil. So I was tutoring him like Portuguese. I was trying to teach him Portuguese. And yeah, I was mainly that what I was doing during those 8 months, because he could not work full-time anywhere because I had to leave.
Cool, thanks. Brandon, do you have any comments, thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, if I were you guys, I would highly recommend taking the last summer off before grad school to travel and do whatever your heart desires if you can. I knew I wanted to go straight into grad school, so like getting an industrial job and going back, because I knew if I started seeing that money and whatnot, I was not going, there's not a chance you're going to get me to take a class. So I knew it was something I was set on, so I just was dedicated, and I knew that 2 or 3 months break between the end of me graduating to the start of grad school was enough. I just did whatever I wanted. Like I traveled a lot. I did a bunch of hiking. I traveled to Colorado, seeing all the different sites there. But I would highly recommend, if like you're set on grad school, to not get tied up in an internship that summer before grad school, just take it off. If you just want to sit on a couch and watch every Netflix show possible, do it, because because honestly, it's the last break you'll probably ever get in your career, where you can just sit for 2 to 3 months and not do anything, not considering the COVID stuff that did happen. But in general, like, these are like probably the last, those are probably the last 2 or 3 months, if you're set on a PhD, that you'll have free time to do whatever you would like. So I would highly recommend.
Yeah, and so questions came in: is it possible to take a gap year, no working between graduating and starting grad school? I think that would be hard to, you could do it, right? You could do whatever you want. But it would be that there would be questions kind of, I think, on the, when you're applying, of as to what did you do during that year? And if you can say I did X, Y, Z, then great, right? But if you're taking a whole year off to sit on a couch, then I would not recommend that. But you know, I think that a gap year would not be a bad thing. The hardest thing, what I would say, is staying in touch with your letter writers. And this comes from whether or not you're taking a gap year, or whether you're going out into industry to work. If you want to kind of return back into your graduate studies, you're going to need strong letters of recommendation. And if you don't stay in touch with your faculty or people you've worked with, then that can be hard to do, right? To come back in. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think that if you want to take a gap year and that's the best next step for you, then know what you're going to do during that year. That's what I would recommend. So,
or so, like, another alternative maybe to like a gap year, if like you live close enough to like the university you attended in undergrad and there's a professor you did research for in undergrad, maybe just talk to them for that year. Could I just do some minor research, like a little bit of research, but not too much? I kind of want to take this time to like explore research, but also I want a lot of time to rest up for grad school. So like, if you have a working relationship with a professor you've been doing research for your entire, like the last few years of undergrad or whatnot, maybe you could talk with them and see, maybe you could set something up for that year where you potentially get even like slightly paid or something like that over that year. To like have something on the resume and say, I wasn't just sitting on a couch all day, I was still doing research. I just needed like some time to like figure out what research I enjoy doing or something like that. I think that would be a good alternative as well, if that's possible.
yeah, and I would say it's pretty common for, or it can be somewhat common if you want to like kind of build another skill set to go like be a technician for a year or two before you come into grad school. It's less common, I feel like, in engineering, but that's still something. So I think just know your motivation, right? Know like what you're, you know, whatever you're doing is kind of building you up for that next step. I think that that's the most important part. Okay, so I'm going to lightning round this next slide, and I think I'm going to hit on AIChE's question about, you know, if you have to look for a fellowship or if a school does that for you. So how exactly do you pay for grad school? So I'm not going to go, again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but in addition to fellowships, there are a number of different ways to pay for your graduate education. Graduate assistantships are the most common. And so again, like I said, these are free, these provide free tuition, a monthly paycheck, so a stipend, and also some other benefits. And so how do you get these? So as you apply for graduate programs, with your application, you will be considered for some of these different types of funding. You will be considered for graduate assistantships with as part of your admissions. Some external fellowships and some other fellowships do require a separate application. At Purdue, if you're interested in continuing for grad study at Purdue, there are specific fellowships for Purdue undergrads to do their master's or PhD at Purdue. So that's something that should definitely be on your radar. If you have questions about that, then reach out to me. There are also, if there are any accessory parts of the application, always do them. So like Purdue has a diversity essay, and you doing that will make you eligible for the Purdue Doctoral, which is a really prestigious fellowship that our schools give out. So any optional areas, definitely do them. Okay, so what are some different types of graduate assistantships? There's a research assistantship where you're doing research with a professor. There's teaching assistantships where, you know, you're assisting with lecture, lab, or other course responsibilities. And then there are administrative professional assistantships, which can really vary widely, but they typically are associated with an academic unit, and they're doing, they are assistantships that have you doing specific administrative duties. So I can talk more about that if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer any funding questions kind of at the end. So how can you prepare? Let's see, yeah. You know, it sounds like a lot of you guys are already doing research right now, but if there's any research that you're really excited about, go visit people virtually, right, and go talk with them. And again, I want to harken back to, you want to think about these letters of recommendation and how they will kind of translate to your graduate application, whether that's faculty and courses that you're in, or whether that's faculty you're doing research with. Okay, and so how else can you prepare? You can set goals and keep them, right? A lot of you guys are kind of, half of you guys are seniors, so setting tangible goals for the graduate application would be really important. And I'd be happy to kind of chat offline after this session about how you can do that. And in terms of the younger students, you know, keep doing research, talk to current graduate students. You want to keep up your GPA as much as possible. Some schools or some universities actually have a minimum threshold for GPA, so keep that up as much as you can. Most schools and universities are still requiring the GRE, so check to see if universities require that and take that. Stay organized as you're looking through different programs. I would highly recommend having an Excel spreadsheet saying like graduate program X and like, you know, application dates and do they require the GRE and what faculty am I excited about doing research with. So as you're kind of looking at these institutional websites, stay organized. You don't want to have to keep going back to that same, you know, Purdue Chemical Engineering graduate program website a bajillion times. Put a link in an Excel file, have it all organized. And some events that, you know, that you should keep an eye on for if you're interested in graduate school. So the Big Ten Grad Expo, it's going to be virtual. It's the very beginning of October this year, so I can send you more information about that if you're interested. I would also, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about fellowships, our Office of Graduate Education is running some fellowships on the NSF, so the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, so GRFP. This is only open to domestic students because it's run through the NSF, but that's another great fellowship that you could learn a little bit more about if you're kind of a younger student. Is the optional GRE just for this year or will it be back mandatory next year? So Arsha, I will tell you that right now, Purdue, a lot of our programs are, or some, probably about half and half. Half of our programs are still requiring the GRE. The GRE, I believe you can take it online right now if you can't get to a testing center. So as of right now, I think schools that are requiring it will continue to require it. Schools that are not requiring it this year because of COVID, I can't make any promises of whether they're going to keep not requiring it or if they are going to require it again. So I would just keep a constant communication with those graduate programs. And each graduate program has a graduate coordinator or administrator. You can kind of think about them as like the, excuse me, like the academic advisors for grad students. So like I said, so chemical engineering has Bev Johnson here at Purdue. She's awesome to reach out to if you have any questions. So like I said, every graduate program has a graduate administrator or graduate coordinator who you can reach out to and ask kind of these administrative type questions. Okay, so to our panelists, what is something that surprised you about graduate school?
Something that surprised me about grad school, I would say one of the things that I did not expect in grad school is that you also have those smaller roles that kind of give you like a feeling of the real life jobs. Yeah, grad school is it is a real job because we do have to work, but we also need not only do research, but when you're working the lab, since all the students are supposed to be managing the lab, we do have all of these other tasks that we need to do on a daily basis, like check the inventory, make sure that we have chemicals, order stuff, make sure that we have everything for us, sometimes reaching out to people when we need collaborators, work with some collaborators on the side, make sure that we talk to the administration. Sometimes we do need to make sure that everything for all the paperwork for the lab is in order. So I'd say that was one of the things that surprised me. There was also a lot of trying to administer the lab. I guess that was like the main thing that surprised me, I would say. If I can think of something else, I might say later.
I would agree with Laryssa 100%. It's the like all the managerial things you have to balance on top of research. I got that as a shock because like in my undergrad research as well as the RAUs I were on, like I was just there to do research. I didn't see all them doing all the managerial tasks. I just got to do the research, the fun, exciting part. When you come to grad school, you also like are in charge of like maintaining the lab, maintaining like a safe, healthy culture in the lab as well. So it's like, for example, like I'm in charge of like ordering supplies and maintaining like a clean lab for one of the labs in my research group, as well as I'm the safety officer. So I have to like change paperwork, do chemical inventories in all labs before OSHA comes to do yearly inspections over the summer and things like that. And it was things like that that I would say shocked me the most. I was like, wow, this is a lot of extra work on top of just doing research. So I would say be prepared for that as well.
And also those are really, really important actually, because when like now I work at Dow, like in an actual company, and we still have to do those things on the side, like make sure that we have a safe environment in the lab, making sure that we are always making everything as safe as possible. So it was good to at least be eased into those roles and now have like more of that responsibility. So.
Yeah, and I would actually say that that's almost like the informal training of being a grad student. And again, it's not necessarily those things you think about. Like, I mean, I have to echo like I was in charge of our lab cleanup every year, like where we defrosted all of our all of our fridge, all of our 4-degree fridges. And basically like, I think I took on that responsibility. I actually traded someone for a pipette. I wanted a specific pipette, and I said, I'll take on that responsibility for a pipette. And I'm like young, naive Jackie. So yeah, cool. Okay, so I just want to list some additional resources here. And again, I just want to reiterate that each graduate program has a graduate office and a graduate coordinator or contact. So if you have any questions kind of about the application process, then definitely visit their website, contact them, don't hesitate to reach out to them. So and I want to say thank you to our panelists. And thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing, but I would definitely encourage you to hang around and ask some questions. So, and feel free to unmute if you want to ask any other specific questions for our panelists. And even they can be super chill about, like what's your favorite thing about being a grad student at Purdue or things like that. So, any questions? Okay, panelists. So why, I think we've already kind of talked about why you're excited about research, but maybe, and Laryssa, you're already in your career at Dow, but I guess like, how do you see your careers progressing after grad school? Or like, what like really excites you? Like Laryssa, I'm assuming Dow is not gonna be your last career, right? It's exciting and novel right now, but yeah, any comments on that?
Yeah, I feel like I'm obviously biased to say because now I work at Dow, but I feel like Dow is really exciting to work for. I really like not only my work environment, but all the things that Dow does as well, as far as all the products go. And one thing for sure is that you are not limited. Inside Dow, if you want to do different stuff, you can. For example, I was a PhD student in catalysis, but now I work with silicons. And even within Dow, if you want to change your path, you can. Because, for example, they have a polyurethanes department, they have polymers department, they have, they used to have solar cell department. They have like so many different departments, and you're not limited to what you're working now. You can actually move around and go to other departments where like, I no longer want to do silicons. I want to go and work for like coatings and learn more about coatings. So you can ask to be transferred. So you don't even need to leave the company to be able to work in a different area that you are working in. And also that's another thing that is cool about having a PhD is that during grad school, you are learning how to do research, and that's what they call the transferable skills in industry, is that they know that you're good at learning stuff and applying that knowledge into actual research. So they really don't have any trouble about, yeah, you don't want to do silicones anymore, you want to do polyurethanes, fine, you can go ahead and do it, because we know that you can learn by yourself and apply all of those in there. And even when you think like, I need to learn everything from scratch, it's not actually learning everything from scratch, because you always have the base knowledge that you had in grad school. You have that toolbox. For example, yes, I'm transferring from catalysis to silicon, so I did need to learn a lot about silicon chemistry, but some of the main stuff, some of the fundamentals are still the same. For example, I need to do some characterization for my materials. I still know all the characterization methods that I had when in grad school. I still can apply those because those are still the same regardless of where you go. So I'll say like that is the things that I'm more excited about working in industry as a PhD.
Yeah, and I think I just saw in the question, so maybe Brandon, you can tackle this one. How do you know if a graduate program is good?
I would say you have to define what good means to you. Are you just looking at a ranking, or you just want to go to a highly ranked grad school to try to do the best research you can? I think good for me is what university has the best professor for what type of research you want to do. So when I was looking into grad school, I didn't look at rankings at all. I mean, rankings did play a little bit of a factor, but I mainly chose universities that had research professors that were doing research in catalysis, studying specific chemistries that I was interested in. So I would say I wouldn't pay attention too much to the rankings. Obviously, they're there for a reason, and it seems a little, to me, like when I talked to fellow peers that were applying to grad school as well, they didn't really care. They were just looking for professors that really did the research that they were interested in. That's the main thing. And also I would say like looking at grad programs that have more than one professor that are doing the research that gets you excited is the best strategy. Because if you go into a grad school only wanting to work for this one guy and that's the only like research project that you find interesting, the chances that you get him are not zero, but they're not 100%. So I would say choose a university that has professors that do research that you find interesting, and also there are multiple. Don't be one-dimensional, just go for one guy, because everyone that gets admitted has a chance of being assigned to that professor, or the professor might hire someone else over you. So keep that in mind for sure.
And I would definitely say that if you're talking about like, if you know a grad program is good in the sense of like healthy, like not like too cutthroat, or, you know, those types of like, I want to say more touchy-feely good, like that you feel like it'll be a good fit for you. I would definitely recommend reaching out to some of the grad students, because so say you like Professor X, right? And you want to do research in his or her lab. You can always reach out to their grad students. If you think that there's a good fit with the research professor, you can reach out to their grad students and say like, what is it really like to be a grad student in their lab? Like, do you clearly define expectations? You know, are there like tangible deliverables? Is it realistic? Things like that. You know, so that could definitely be a thing that you could do as well.
Also, I would comment like the professor, like let's say you get into all these like top universities and you're having a trouble like deciding which one you want to choose. I would highly recommend like which group of grad students in that professor's group would you get along the best with, as well as like, do you get along with the professor? Because if you don't get along with the professor, you're going to have to be dealing with him for 5 years. And like, there's some just qualities in professors I look into. And like, for example, to give like a part of my story, I got into like a bunch of top universities. And what really drew me to Purdue was Raj. He seemed like he genuinely cared because I was moving and I had no idea. I lived in the boondocks of South Carolina. I'd never seen a big city in my life. Never really moved outside of the state. And he was like genuinely concerned and trying to help me get here and make sure everything, like my move was fine. And like when I moved in, he decided to have dinner with me. So it's like those genuine qualities where like he actually cared about me and I wasn't just someone to like push his research forward was a huge deciding factor in choosing Purdue over other top universities. So I would say definitely see if you mesh well with your advisor as well.
And I think
another thing too, oh, sorry, Jackie, I was just going to add to that. And say like definitely talk to the grad students and see what the professor is like, because sometimes it's not even just a matter of like if the professor cares for you or not. Yep, this is all important. But sometimes it's also the personality of the professor. Like some professors are more micromanaging, some professors are more hands-off, and you want to get the feeling of how the professor is going to be and know what is your personality like. If you want to go to someone who is more hands-off, or if you want to go to someone who is more micromanaging, it's like, it's not right or wrong. It's just like the style that fits you.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to ping on, I saw the question in the chat is, you know, basically what is this graduate application process like and when do you start to apply? And so maybe this will ping in a little bit to how you find that professor fit. But basically applications tend to be due around December, and then faculty will review those end of December, early January, February maybe. And then a lot of times, at least for PhD programs, they'll actually invite you to campus. So they'll fly you to campus, wine and dine you, and then it's a fit on both sides. They want to make sure that, you know, that you are a good fit for them and that they are a good fit for you. So that can sometimes, depending on how a program is structured, so I know for chemical engineering here at Purdue, you come in kind of as a cohort and you get to actually like, you have some like choosing process that first semester, and then you kind of, the matching happens that first semester. Some programs are very much, you apply to a program to work with Professor X. And so those recruitment days are very important to make sure that there's a good working relationship there. And I've heard chemical engineering, at least at Purdue, the recruitment process is they do a pretty swanky job on it. But I know for, at least for my own experiences, when I was a grad student, I applied to about 8 schools. I interviewed at 3 of them. And at that point, I did my undergrad on Long Island outside of New York, and all of them were in New England. And I drove to all of my interviews. I got reimbursed for my mileage. I actually, for driving to 3 interviews, I paid myself back on all of my application fees. I got about like $800 worth of reimbursements for mileage that literally paid for all my apps. So that's a fun fact, that not all schools will like fully pay for travel, but most will. So they will fly you out to, or drive you out to make sure there's a good fit there in that recruitment process. So that makes sense. Yeah, feel free to, if you have any other questions, definitely feel free to unmute, but I know some people had to get going, so that works too. But thank you, panelists. Appreciate it. But yeah,
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. So I can definitely share some information. I don't mind like chatting with seniors too. So Gabriella, if you want to, if you hear of anyone in the club who is a senior looking to apply and they want to like just sit down and have a life conversation with me, I don't mind. So
yeah, I'll definitely let them know.
yeah, cool. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and it's so nice being here, and thank you again, panelists. So we'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Gabrielle, I'll try and I'll share the slides with you shortly after. So I'll the recording as well. So,
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much for the talk.
Yeah.
It's so great.